It's just so hard. I, and lazy, maybe lazy is not the best term, but I can't think of a better term. But it's just hard for me to say that, like, because all of these washed up X receivers couldn't do anything in a Ben Johnson offense, that means Roma Dunze is not going to do anything in a Ben Johnson offense. I mean, there are levels to the talent here that we're talking, and Roma Dunze is much better than all of those
Yes.
guys. But there is one other quote from Ben Johnson where he says, I don't want my quarterback throwing 50-50 balls. I trust my offense to get players open, and I would rather throw to an open receiver than asking a receiver to make a play on a ball. Roma Dunze is not an elite separator. Like, he can
Right.
flash open for a quick second. He can come down with contested balls, but Ben Johnson wants to throw to open receivers. And when I go back and I watch what the Bears were doing last year, Luther Burden, Colson Loveland, those were the guys that were just open on an island.
Welcome to Dynasty Compass. I am Jeff Blaylock, the other Jeff B from Footballguys, and I am joined today by my friend and colleague, also from Footballguys, Dave Kluge, and now SiriusXM. Dave, how you doing? And welcome to the show.
Doing good. This is a fun, busy time of year. We were talking a little bit pre-show, but yeah, I sat down over the weekend and I said, let me see if I can kind of get ahead of my next week or two of planning. And then before I knew it, I had planned everything out through week one. Like, it is here. People are at training camp. We got vets reporting this week. It's kind of hard to believe how quickly the season is coming up on us here.
Yeah, I can't believe that we're already to training camps. I mean, where did this summer go? Where did our off season go? It's like we just did the draft yesterday.
Seriously, yeah, and it feels like that every single year. I was just talking with somebody recently, but I think a nature of this business is kind of like to break the year up into chunks, and you're always kind of looking to that next thing. Like, okay, you got the NFL draft, and then after the NFL draft, it's like, okay, we got best ball season, and then we got training camps, and then we got week one, and then we have week 17, and then we have the Super Bowl, and before you know it, you blink, and like 6 years have gone by, and that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, time is moving fast, and it's just crazy. I mean, I can't believe that it's 20. What year is this? 2026? Is that
Yep.
where we're in now? So,
Hmm.
if you're watching this in a different year, what we're talking about is going to be radically different from what's actually going on. So, hopefully, you're seeing this year. So, yeah, I mean, let's just jump in, man. Well, first of all, thank you for coming back. You were the very first guest I had on the show. You're now the very first guest to return. So, thank you for
Awesome.
that. But let's roll in. We got training camps coming up, and with training camps comes lots and lots and lots of information and lots of misinformation and a hell of a lot of misinterpretation of what we do get out of training camps. How do you keep your sanity and separate all of these things from each other? The news, the not news, and just the wrong take.
Context, and more context. I think that's what gets lost all of the time. It's so easy because there's so much information coming out from beat reporters and coaches and player quotes and all this sort of stuff. It's so easy to take one little piece and just focus on that and make that a larger story when really we just have to look at the whole picture here. And I think, like, one of the things specifically that kind of jumps out to me from like recent news, like in this recent cycle, is Aaron Wilson, a reporter for the Houston Texans, writes this big long article about David Montgomery, how he's going to be a 3-down back for the Houston Texans, and that how that's a part of what this offense needs, and how they've made investments in the offensive line, and David Montgomery's history in Chicago as a 3-down back, and how he can handle pass catching duties and do all these things. And then at the very end of this article, he has one little throwaway line saying, and Woody Marks is hoping to improve on his route running so that he can be a more featured part of the passing attack. And that's what the fantasy industry ran with, was this one little sentence at the end of this love letter to David Montgomery. So something else I go back to is Bob Harris says this all the time, but like, look up the question that elicited a reply, because sometimes that will often give you more context than the answer itself, where, a reporter could ask a coach, like, who's a player that you're expecting to surprise you in training camp? And then the player or the coach says a player's name. Everybody hangs on to that as like, oh, this coach is thinking about like the question was about who can surprise you. So I think just trying to look at as much context as possible. We love social media and quote graphics and all these sorts of things, but read the full article, listen to the full interview. Don't just run wild with the one sentence blurb that gets put into a quote graphic on social media.
Yeah, I mean, you and I just had a couple months ago on your show a discussion about something along these same lines. It was Sean McVay's reaction at the podium
Yes.
talking about Ty Simpson's drafting, and that everybody ran with that as, oh, he hates this pick. And you and I took that completely down, debunked it. But that is another example of just hanging on to something. I will say, at least with that David Montgomery article, if I were the author, I'd at least be happy that they read all the way to the end, because I did leave that line at the end. So that
Right.
tells me somebody read at least the whole thing.
Or somebody
But
just opened that article and Control F Woody Marks. What does he have to say about Woody Marks?
Here we go. Search result 1. Oh, right here. But I mean, what do we expect the coaches to say this time of year, right? I mean, how many of them are supposed to say something negative about any player, including players they don't even know who they are? They're undrafted free agents who are on the roster for training camp.
Right.
They're going to say positive things about everybody this time of year, aren't they?
Exactly. And that's typically what we get. And I think that's something that I talk about a lot. Every single year I go on Harris Football, our good friend Chris Harris, and we do a show kind of talking about like what we're going to be paying attention to in training camp. And I say that like it is so easy to just throw the fluff out the window because there are so many reasons for it. Are you trying to increase a player's trade value? Are you trying to get a player like, you know, I don't want to say like this is not an anti Brian Thomas Jr. take whatsoever, right. But like the amount of positivity coming out of Jacksonville about Brian Thomas Jr., a lot of that to me is just like, is this a concerted effort from the coaching staff and the beat to try to build his confidence back up when his confidence clearly took a hit last year? Because that is a thing. Like coaches are trying to build these players up. So I try to avoid the fluff, the best shape of his life, you know, playing hungrier than ever, like all that sort of stuff, because we hear that about every single sort of player. But if you hear something negative about a player, that is what you definitely want to pay attention to this time of year. If you hear that a player is, you know, struggling to get up to speed with a new offensive playbook, or a player is taking longer to recover from an injury than expected, if negative news is coming out this time of year, that's what you really want to pay attention to, because that typically is a lot more damning than it even comes off as.
Yeah, you mentioned, you know, best shape of his life. I mean, that to me is one of those tropes that I hear every year. I no longer fall for this. I haven't fallen for it since Christian McCaffrey a couple of years ago when he was in the best shape of his life. And then he went overseas to have this weird procedure done on his Achilles tendon, but was somehow still in the best shape of his life.
Right.
So to me, that's kind of a tell that whatever they're talking about is just words. What other kinds of tells really make you skeptical about what you're hearing from a coach or from a beat writer or something like that, or from a player themselves?
I think when we start hearing about like players who are doing things that aren't supposed to be a part of their job. So like when we hear like this running back is taking wide receiver snaps out of the slot, like that's something that people get excited about. And to me, that says they don't trust this guy as a running back and they're looking for other ways. Or that we hear, you know, this player is trying to, you know, get a little bit more involved in special teams. That's usually not a good sign. Like, you know, the players who are really good at doing what they do are typically doing those things. Like, you know, I remember last year with DJ Moore, like we heard so much, like they're trying to get DJ Moore involved as a running back and people were getting excited about that, when the reality is until late in the season when everybody was injured, like DJ Moore was the third or fourth option on that offense.
Yep.
Or you hear about these running backs that are taking snaps out of the slot and we say, oh, this is awesome, this is going to be great for their PPR value, when really that probably means that they just aren't good enough at running back to win that running back job, and they're trying to see if there's any way to salvage some sort of role for them. So anytime I hear stuff like that, you know, that they've got quarterbacks working on special teams or quarterbacks lining up, you know, you heard Justin Fields was lining up as a wide receiver a couple of years ago. Right. That to me is the thing that I think when I was inexperienced, I used to get excited about, because this could be the skeleton key. This guy can find new paths to fantasy production, when more likely than not, it means that they probably just aren't good at doing their job.
Yeah, lining up your quarterback at wide receiver or special teams is a good way to get them killed. It's
right.
really not good for their quarterbacking
right.
capabilities. But, you know, I love that you talk about, you know, we want the context. You want to know what was the question that was asked, if it's a press conference or just a conversation between a reporter and a coach, to get that sort of context. But, you know, social media doesn't really work that way. It moves really, really fast. You know, you and I are both really active on social media. And we try to be very smartly selective in terms of what we share and what we repost. You know, what signals do you put the most stock in, either what's being said or who's saying it, that makes you comfortable with resharing these news items, even if you haven't had the chance to run them into the ground yet?
Yeah, so first of all, I try as hard as I can not to share anything coming from aggregating accounts. And you probably know the ones that I'm talking about. There's a lot of accounts out there that don't do any actual reporting. They just try to find little snippets from news stories that they know are going to get engagement and then share that. And if your goal is to get engagement, you're not getting engagement from me. I'm going to intentionally ignore those. So first and foremost, I'm ignoring all of the aggregating social media accounts. But I think the other thing that I try to do here, and this does kind of give you a bad rep on Twitter if you want to handle it this way, but I'm not the person who is trying to say what everybody else is saying. So, like, if a glowing report comes out about a player and I see 100 people have already quote tweeted this, I'm not going to have anything to add saying, yeah, you know, this is good. Like, Amon-Ra St. Brown, yeah, like he's good every single year and he's going to be good this year too. Like, you don't need somebody to tell you that. Where I try to focus on the news stories is where I think the consensus has something wrong. And I think the most recent example of this that I can think of, Cam Scadaboo does this backflip, right? And it was, the optics were terrible.
Did not stick that landing. Did not stick the landing at all.
Right. For anybody who hasn't seen this, he's at Fanatics Fest. He's on a stage. He rolls his pants up. He shows all of the scarring on his legs from his recent surgeries, and he kind of does this like, no big deal. And then he does a backflip, and he falls. And everybody runs wild with this story, saying, draft Tyrone Tracy. Cam Scadaboo's off my draft board. Cam Scadaboo's an idiot. Blah, 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 blah. My read on that was a little bit different. I said, you know what? I think this is kind of like required to be a running back. Like, you kind of need to have a couple screws loose and to come back from what could be a career-ending injuries for some players, like to have that mindset that you're willing to just throw a backflip out there. Like, we saw him do a backflip at a charity baseball game a couple months ago, and then we see him do it again on the Fanatics Fest. So that's one that I am willing to share because I think the consensus has the wrong read on that, where they're saying, you know, don't draft this guy. I'm saying, if anything, this gives me a little bit more faith in drafting him because knowing he's got a couple screws loose might actually help him with his recovery. And sure, he might get hurt again at some point. Yep. That's a risk for every player, but that's kind of where I try to focus on news stories, is when I think the masses are just misreading something.
Yeah, you think if he sticks that landing, we get the same basic reaction out of the Twitterverse that we saw there, or is it just because he did the poor backflip?
And it was that. It was the stumbling that led to it. And I mean, like, don't hear what I'm not saying. It was a hilarious video. Like, it is absolutely absurd that Cam Scadaboo is trying to do a backflip in front of a crowd months after surgery, but that to me, and I saw there was one person who agreed with me, Jeff Mueller, who also isn't afraid to go against the grain, and he is a doctor of physical therapy, and he kind of had the same read as me, saying like the biggest thing for a lot of athletes when they're coming back from these injuries is the mental hurdle. It's good to see that Cam Scadaboo has already gotten over that, and I remember like when I had to have my shoulder done a few years back, the mental hurdle of just like hanging from a bar, like a very routine movement, like there is a mental hurdle that's really hard to come back from overcoming injury, and I see Cam Scadaboo already seems to be there.
Yeah, it's real. As a somebody who's had reconstructive knee surgery, I can tell you that first deep squat after that underweight was a terrifying experience, but I was just fine. You know, my take a little different on Cam from you guys. I think, you know, to me it wasn't the fact that he missed the landing; it's that he probably shouldn't have taken it in the first place.
Right.
And while I love that devil may care attitude, I like some discretion too. I like it out of his quarterback as well, Jackson Dart. Yes, it's fun to just run straight through and over a guy. It's also better if you avoid him if you can. But I will say this about Cam Scadaboo, and I've said something kind of negative about him along those lines, and Twitter got kind of roasted for that because he's like, well, this guy's a lot of fun. I'm like, well, that's not the point. Of course he's fun. I'd love to party with this guy. You know, a weekend with him would be unforgettable. And since I don't drink anymore, I would remember all of it. But that doesn't necessarily mean I want to pay full price for him as a dynasty asset at this point in his career, coming off this injury and this devil may care attitude. Yeah, glad he's recovered. I think he's going to be great as long as he's on the field. Hopefully it's a long time, but it may not be. Let's sort of get back. We kind of went down the Cam Scadaboo poor Olympic gymnastics debut rabbit hole there for a second. Let's look back to training camps, and you last year you did a number of training camp reports for Footballguys. You going to do that again this year?
Yeah, not only am I doing the Bears training camp report again, this will be my fourth or fifth year doing it, but I'm actually overseeing the entire project this year. So not only will I just be focusing on the Bears, but I will also be editing all 31 other teams. I've been saying this for years, and I was saying this before I led the project. So this isn't, me just saying this now because it's my baby, but, for years I had said that I think this is the most valuable preseason content there is out there. It is so deep. Like we go very deep on every single team, but then we also distill it down into bullet points for every single team, and then we distill it even further into an episode that Joey Wright and I are going to do every single week, talking about like the one major storyline from every single team. So we're kind of in this lull right now in between after the draft and after OTAs and before training camp, where no news is really happening. Starting next week, there's going to be so much news coming out there, and it's really tough to differentiate, what you should be paying attention to and what you should be ignoring. I think we do a good job here with those Football Guys training camp reports, letting you know what you should be paying attention to.
Yeah, those are excellent. They've been excellent for quite some time. And I find that if you're going to read basically one thing about training camp all year, those are what you read. And even if you decide not to do it for the entire training camp, Dave, I know you've historically done like a wrap-up article at the end of training camp here's everything you missed over the last 6 weeks, kind of an article, and you're real thorough with those. And now that you've got your eyes on all 32 teams, you'll probably be even more thorough this time around than you have been before. But as you're doing those, I mean, as a respected member of this industry, respected analyst, what's your process for building a camp report every week? Because I assume you're not wherever the Bears are training and on the field with those guys on a daily basis. You're sitting at home in Colorado as I'm sitting at home in New Mexico, and we're not anywhere near the field. How do you report on something that you're not watching in person?
I read and listen and watch as much as I possibly can. So there's one podcast that does a really good job. It's Hogue and Johns. They cover the Chicago Bears, and they do a fantastic job. So I listen to everything that they do. I've got a few other podcasts that I listen to as well. I have a Twitter list of all of the reputable Chicago beat reporters. So I go through and tweet and read through all the tweets and videos and everything that they're sharing. Training camp reports, I read all of those as well. I try to watch whatever I can. Of course, the preseason games, we get a lot of good information from there, whether it's snap counts, usage, efficiency, whatever that may be. So really it's just trying to take in as much information as I possibly can. And that's just part of my daily process. Like as I'm working, I'm listening to Bears podcasts. I'm going through this Bears list and taking notes and everything. And then I sit down Sunday afternoon, and that's when I distill everything into, everything that you need to learn. And the nice thing about this too is, like, as you are getting into these training camp reports, everything that we say in there, we cite back to a source. So it becomes this never ending web where you're not just reading what we're sharing with you, but then you can click on a link that brings you to a page that has even more information. So just such deep knowledge depth inside these training camp reports. But my process is just to consume as much as I possibly can, take notes every time I hear something interesting, and then try to distill and condense that all down into something publishable on Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, I think it was Bob Harris who said this, and if it's not, then I apologize to both Bob and whoever did say it. But the comment was something along the lines of that coaches and general managers are never more honest than they are the week before the NFL draft and in those press conferences that are right there. So now we're in training camp. We've already established that coaches need to say positive things and vague things about everybody. Do you think that they are being honest really at all? Are there some coaches you trust more than others when a beat reporter is saying this is what the guy said, or you look at the video and watch what the guy said? Which ones are you trusting or distrusting, and which ones are you just ignoring completely?
Well, I got to give a huge shout out to Greg Branos over at Coach Speak Index. He has done a fantastic job of indexing this. And I was there when Greg first came onto the scene. And I remember talking to him, and he just had a few hundred Twitter followers, and saying, I am so happy that you are doing this because I cannot stand Zach Taylor. That man lies through his teeth. And he said, that's why I started doing this, was because of Zach Taylor. And sure enough, you might remember there was a few years back, and I might be botching the details of this story, but Joe Mixon was listed as day-to-day for months. And it was just like we kept waiting for Joe Mixon to come back, and it was day-to-day, he'll be back here any day. And we got that song and dance for 2 months, and then he just hit season-ending IR and didn't play again. And we were all, and this was back before he had the foot injury with the Texans. This was back in his Bengals day. And Greg said that he got so frustrated by that experience that he decided to start indexing all of these coaches and seeing who tells the truth and who lies. And I think it's something that, over time you do just kind of get a feel for. And there are different types of coaches. Like you've got your Dan Campbells and your Ben Johnsons and your Sean McVays. They are going to tell you exactly how they feel. They aren't going to hide anything. They aren't going to sugarcoat anything. Dan Campbell will come out and say, like, we are going to run this play on 4th and 2, and you guys can try to stop it, and knowing that they can't. And like Ben Johnson is going to be very open with what his plans are. And then you've got some others, the Zach Taylors, who I think kind of come from that Belichickian tree where they are just as tight-lipped as possible. They aren't going to say anything. They're going to answer everything with one-word answers. And then you've got other ones that are just going to like outright lie and deceive. And that's your Kyle Shanahans and your Nick Siriannis. Like they are trying to throw game plans off by like planting seeds of mistrust in the media. So there's so many different types of coaches, and I feel like you pick up those traits naturally over time just by doing this. But I can't shout out Greg Branos and what he's done with Coach Speak Index enough. Just a fantastic resource that, we kind of get these ideas of what we think coaches do, but Greg sits there and he details every single press conference and puts them on an index. So there is no gray area. Like he can tell you black and white who you should and should not trust.
Yeah, I 100% endorse that altogether. I mean, I'm on his Discord server, just where he posts a lot of his material. He charges almost nothing for it, so I mean, it is a great use of. I think it's $5 or $8 a month to be able to tap into that. It is an incredible resource, and I encourage anybody who's watching or listening to this who wants to get into the ins and outs of who to trust and who not. And how to go about that. Coach Speak Index, that's Greg's site. That's a place I'd turn to. So, he was burned by Zach Taylor. I'm sure I have been burned by Zach Taylor. I know I was, because I held on to Joe Mixon that season way, way, way longer than I needed to. And even traded for him in that season somewhere, I think, because he was just day to day. He's going to be back any day now.
Yep.
Just on the lighthearted side, what's a training camp story that, you thought was a good signal and it just turned out to be nothing? It burned you a bit. Maybe you forwarded it or talked about it or hyped it up, and it was, crow eating city after that.
Well, like I said, I cover the Chicago Bears. That's the team that I cover for Football Guys. And going into the 2024 season, there was so much hype about Velus Jones. And like it felt very warranted. And I talked earlier about how now I kind of see through hey, we've got this player who's this position playing this position. Now I kind of see that as a negative, because Velus Jones, who couldn't get it done as a receiver, they said, well, he could emerge as the lead running back, and he's been explosive on special teams, and he's out there, lining up as the tight end, and he can play out wide, and he's playing out of the slot, and he's kind of doing it all. And I was really buying into this, because they were talking about, the year 3 breakout, that he was going to be heavily involved in this new offense, that he was getting wide receiver and running back duties. And what actually happened is he had no role to start the season. He ended up having 11 offensive yards before he was cut in the middle of October, and that kind of marked the end of his NFL career. And in hindsight, it's pretty obvious the Bears were just trying to pump up his trade value, hoping that some team out there would bite. But unfortunately, what ended up happening is that fantasy managers also bought into the hype and thought that he was going to be something that he wasn't. So that's something that I try to be a little bit more cognizant of, is like players who are trade candidates. If we start getting all of this like just gushing positive storylines, you don't want to buy into it too much, because teams are incentivized to try to raise that trade value, because I'm sure they would have loved to get a 7th round pick for Velus Jones, but nobody gave up anything, and they were forced to cut him mid-season. So that's one that definitely, I had drafted quite a bit of Velus Jones in round 20 of my best ball drafts that year, and it ended up just being a complete dud.
Yeah, I had to cut him in midseason in a couple of places myself, but at least for me, he was always kind of a late round flyer, one of those guys you put on the bench, hope something happens. If they don't, you cut him. It doesn't cost you anything. But best ball, that's a format that's not forgiving. Zeros are unforgivable in best ball. So hopefully the rest of your team was able to salvage that. But
we'll see. I'm drafting Jalen Tolbert this year, and those could all end up being zeros down the road too.
Let's look at I think from what I would call we've seen this movie before. I mean, there's always these sort of storylines that keep emerging. Like the day 3 rookie that's really impressing coaches, the running back 2 battle, the reclamation project, the injury return hype. The year 3 breakout, the new guy on a new team. All these kinds of storylines. Let's walk through some of those and kind of tease out what dynasty managers ought to be paying attention to out of those stories, and what they should be ignoring, or at the very least, I won't even say a grain of salt. Take it with a salt lick.
Yeah, I think the one that I try to ignore is the day three rookies, just because we get excited. Like, we put so much time in January, February, March, April into studying all of these rookies that, we could have 32 NFL teams tell us 6 times that they aren't interested in this player and he falls to day 7, but we are still going to say, well, I think that I know better and this guy could break out. And I think what makes it so hard to not buy into this is that when these guys do hit, they end up being league tilting type plays like Puka Nacua, Antonio Brown, Stephon Diggs, Tyreek Hill, Kyron Williams. We can go way back to the Arian Foster days. I mean, I don't know who was playing Dynasty back when they got Tom Brady in round 4 of their Dynasty rookie draft, but like, when these guys do hit, they really do tilt a league in a manager's favor, but the likelihood of them hitting is so small. So, I think you have to have 1 or 2 guys that you're willing to bet on. Maybe it's a Katrin Allen, maybe it's a Chris Bell, like somebody out there. But the reality is, more often than not, these day 3 guys just don't find paths to fantasy relevance. The other one that's tough for me not to buy into is the injury return hype, because it is so hard for me to penalize a talented prospect if they haven't had their opportunity to show us that they're good or bad. So a Jonathan Brooks, Trey Benson, Marshawn Lloyd, Ricky Pearsall, these were all prospects that I really liked. And I wish that I could say they aren't good at football and just give up on them, but they haven't really had a chance to prove that they aren't good at football yet. So I'm still holding on to these prospect profiles that I really liked, and it's tough for me to give up on those guys. And I think that's probably the biggest gap in my analysis, if I'm being honest. But it's just so hard for me when I see a guy like Jonathan Brooks, who I loved coming into the league, has everything we want to see in fantasy football, hasn't played any of the last 2 years really, but I still feel like, given the age, given the upside, given the athleticism, that if he can put it together, there's still something to be had there.
Yeah, I've seen you. We're in several leagues together. I've seen you draft him in a couple of redraft leagues this year, down in the rounds. And all I could think of when you did it every time was, he just saved me from myself. That is a snipe I really don't mind. I mean, I never want guys to get hurt. I want them to succeed. But, you rattled off several players who barely played in 2+ years. And, are we going to fall for it again? Maybe. Some of us may fall for it. I know in Dynasty, you kind of get stuck with them after a while. I mean, everyone who's got Marshawn Lloyd on their roster probably can't move him right now. And this one I wouldn't try, because he either is going to turn into something or he's not. But either way, he's going to get you nothing in trade value. So you wait till that guy hits. Brooks, I think's probably, because I was really in on Brooks coming out of school as well. He was one of my top profile guys that year. But you just watch the world around them kind of as other people come and take their spots. It's really harder to get back into. But let's look at day 3 rookies for a second, because I think particularly a Dynasty, we really get caught up in the hype of it. We forget that we also drafted these guys in round 3 and 4 and beyond.
Right.
Today, this is Tuesday, July the something or other, before training camp start. Big story today talking about Eli Heidenreich maybe struggling to make the 53-man roster in Pittsburgh. And while that should be obvious because he was a 7th-round pick, he's out of Navy, they've already got 4 running backs on the roster. You just sort of like, yeah, but I drafted him. I want him to succeed. So how do you pick like the guys that you think might have a chance and try to get off the guys that are feel good stories but no path?
Yeah, and I think Heidenreich is a perfect example. This is like the 3rd time we've talked about this on this show now, but like a guy who doesn't really have a clear NFL path. Like, he is a good rusher, he is a good receiver, but he's not great at any of them. And Jeff, I remember when we did a show, the first episode here of the Dynasty Compass, and we were talking about prospect analysis, and I said, I don't want a guy who is good at everything. I want a guy who is a specialist at one thing, because that's going to help him get out the field. And that's Eli Heidenreich is good at everything, and that worked in a Navy offense. And I kind of made a joke back in March. I tweeted out, I said, man, if Eli Heidenreich could just find an NFL team that's willing to build an entire offense around him the way that Navy did, because that's what it takes. Like, he isn't a player who can go out and just beat man coverage one-on-one as a wide receiver. He's also not a guy who can line up in the backfield and take 300 hits a year. Like, he is a guy who really needs to have an offense built around him. So I think that's what I look for, are skills that are transferable to the NFL. So, you know, we're sitting here talking about how day 3 running backs rarely hit, and they do rarely hit. But like, one example of a day 3 running back that I do like is Katron Allen, because he has the size. He's got the tackle breaking ability. He's got that goal line build that maybe he isn't going to be a guy who gets 300 plus touches, but they're already talking about him in training camp being the best in short yardage situations, and that he can be the goal line back on this team. Now, that might not lead to a very fruitful path in fantasy, and you're waiting for this kind of touchdown or bust production, but that gets him on the field, that gets opportunities. And then if Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt goes down, if Rashad White goes down, they could trust him enough to open up that playbook a little bit. But I think that at least gives him a chance to make the team and get a chance to prove himself early. So that's kind of what I'm looking for, is like, is there something that a player does really, really well that can get him on the field and get him his opportunity early?
And Katron Allen's another great example of that sort of injury bug situation hurting his value, because he came out of school injured, and that hurt his draft value a little bit. So that's something else to consider. But I also, I love that you talk about what's the role. You get the elite talent that gets them on the field, that gets them on that rotation, allows them to crack into that, to do whatever the thing is they do it really well. But then there's also sort of that path to opportunity. And that's why, Nick Singleton is one that I'm either going to look great for pumping up or will look stupid for doing it, because he's got a path to a lot of touches. The 2 running backs there in Tennessee are both free agents after this year and both getting older. And so there's at least a pathway for him to quite a bit of volume. Whether he is any good with any of it or not, or actually gets it, we won't know. But as dynasty managers, we have to sort of choose people to take those kind of chances. I'm not necessarily asking you if you like Nick Singleton, but I mean, is there somebody kind of in that vein that you say, okay, the talent may not be as good as others, but there is at least a path to a role that is meaningful enough that I'd want him on my roster?
So the 2 things that I really look for, in addition to like just the talent or the hyper specialized utility, like I mentioned, and this is going to sound so crazy, but the 2 things that I'm looking for in day 3 guys are players who are injured or players who have character concerns. And I know that sounds absolutely wild, but those are the things that cause talented players to fall deep into drafts. Like, I am very much so of the belief that Nick Singleton specifically, since you brought him up, I think he would have been a day 2 pick if he didn't break his foot in the spring, but he broke his foot at a Senior Bowl practice, and I think that caused him to fall in the draft a little bit. So I'm willing to take a chance on him. And that's the same exact rhetoric that I was using last year for Torrey Horton. I thought Torrey Horton should have been a round 2 or round 3 receiver, but he had the knee issue that caused him to fall late in the draft. And then, of course, his season ends early because of that knee issue. So wasn't really able to clear those injury concerns, but that is what caused him to fall in the draft. Puka Nacua came in with some injury concerns. That caused him to fall in the draft. Some of the other names that I mentioned that hit huge in the NFL draft, there were day 3 picks. Tyreek Hill, character concerns. Stephon Diggs, character concerns. Antonio Brown, character concerns. So these guys fall often because teams don't want to take the chance. And while that could be scary in Dynasty, you're getting these players at such a discount because of the depreciated draft cost, and they still have that same upside. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Isaiah Bond was another player that I liked last year that I was drafting because of character concerns, and we saw little flashes here and there, but he's a player that probably, had he not had those character concerns, would have been drafted a little bit higher, but that caused him to fall in the draft. Kayshon Boutte was another guy. Injury concerns pushed him all the way into round 6. This guy we were talking about prior to his final year at LSU, we had him in the same tier as Malik Neighbors, talking about him as like one of the elite prospects out there, but then he has the ankle injury, falls in the draft a little bit, but that's a player that I'm still willing to take a risk on in Dynasty, putting a little asterisk next to that draft capital.
Yeah, Boutte's a great example. I mean, he's holding his own against one of the best receivers to come out of college in a long time, until calamity strikes, and now he kind of tumbles down the board. That's also, to me, I mean, this is obviously Dynasty Compass. I assume most of the people, if not all people watching, listening, are Dynasty players, so they understand the idea that there are deep benches and you can have the opportunity to take some of these guys cheap. But if you also play redraft, these are the exact guys you should not draft at all in redraft. Or perhaps if you have a very last pick, you take that player over a defense, for example, and wait to see what happens in training camp. And then you drop them if nothing happens and you pick up your defense. But some of the guys that that we're mentioning here are specific no's in redraft formats, because you need performance now, and a lot of these guys either have paths that go through other people's injuries, free agency a year from now, or other kinds of situations that they're not going to do anything for you now. If you're taking them in the same sort of rounds you might take them in a dynasty startup, you're going to regret that.
And I can tell you right now, you talk about injuries and, injuries opening up paths to players to get training camp.
Mm-hmm.
I promise you, Jeff, 3 weeks from now, there will be a bunch of people on social media saying, I can't believe how many players are injured in training camp this year. Have there ever been this many training camp injuries before?
Yep.
And every single year training camp opens, a handful of players get hurt, and then everybody says, I can't believe how many injuries there are. So that's the other thing is like, yeah, we want to pay attention to the risers and fallers and the good news, but it's the injuries in training camp that shake up the depth charts more than everything else. And for whatever reason, every single year when we're sitting here at the end of July, beginning of August, people forget that players get injured in training camp. That is going to happen over the next few weeks.
And they will enter it injured and be held out when they might have been able to play during the season, because it doesn't matter in terms of preseason games or whatnot. And if you've got a guy who's recovering, you don't rush him out for training camp. But would it be helpful if he had training camp? Yes, but it'd be helpful if he were at 100%. If he's not, and I think we tend to start panicking over that sometimes. Like I have a feeling Malik Neighbors is not going to play a single snap of training camp this year.
Right.
Is that
but
a
people
problem?
will double count that. Like I think if you polled 95% of fantasy and dynasty managers right now, they'd say that Malik Neighbors won't be ready for the start of training camp. But what's going to happen? The Giants are going to start training camp, and they're going to say Malik Neighbors isn't ready, and then everybody's going to panic, and you're going to see his value on keep, trade, cut go, and you're going to see him fall around in best ball drafts. Even though we know it's going to happen, people double count on this sort of stuff all the time. So, once training camp opens, I don't know who it's going to be, but there are so many players entering training camp with injuries, whether it's Malik Neighbors, Cam Scadaboo, Tucker Kraft, Tank Dell, all of these players that we know are dealing with injuries, whichever ones aren't able to play at the start of training camp, those are the players that you go out and buy because managers are going to double count those injuries.
We've talked kind of generically here about different storylines and a few specific examples, but let's just dive into, some of the storylines that you're watching as training camps start to open up. You, of course, are very, very closely watching Chicago, but you've got your eyes in every other training camp as well. So what are some of the stories that you are really interested in following and interested to see how they turn out this year?
So I think, we already talked about it a little bit, but the Giants injuries, we've got Cam Scadaboo coming back. We've got Malik Neighbors coming back. And I think right now, people are going to, and this is one where you talk about like the things that I share on social media. This will be it because one of those players am almost positive will not be ready for the start of training camp. And everybody's going to say, oh, Malik Neighbors is off my draft board. And I will be quote tweeting that if we say Malik Neighbors is on PUP or Malik Neighbors isn't ready to start the year. That's where I will be quote tweeting that on social media saying go out and buy Malik Neighbors because you're getting a discounted window right now. So I think that's probably one of the most fascinating ones to start with is just the Giants. They've got multiple injuries. They've also got a whole new coaching staff coming in there. So I'm going to be paying close attention to what the Giants are going to be doing.
Yeah, I think, Neighbors, my expectation is he is going to open the season on PUP. So that to me is already built into what I'm looking at, and I'm evaluating it that way. If your expectation is he's going to be, a top wide receiver on week one, I'll come take him off your hands after that week when he is on PUP. I'm happy to do that because he'll come through here eventually. What about this new coaching staff in New York? I know it's a little bit off topic here, but let's just sort of back up to that storyline too. We didn't cover that in the archetypes, but you've got new coaching staff coming into place, new offense being developed. We got 20 new play callers in the league this year or something along those lines. What are the signals from all of that, and what's the static from all of that when you're looking at training camp and seeing these new coaching regimes come in and install whatever they're going to install?
Well, like Littlefinger from Game of Thrones says, chaos is a ladder, and bringing in these new coaching staffs opens up opportunities for other players to rise up that depth chart. So, I'm speaking completely, not that I expect this to happen, but last year we saw Caleb Johnson, just for whatever reason, ended up in Mike Tomlin's doghouse. Now, I'm not the biggest Caleb Johnson fan. I thought that he was very overdrafted last year. I think that he's got some warts in his profile, but now we've got new offensive coordinator, new head coach coming into Pittsburgh. now they are looking at this running back room with a completely clean slate. Now, of course, there's some, relation with Mike McCarthy and Rico Dowdle, but when he's looking at Jalen Warren, he doesn't see the 5 years that Mike Tomlin saw with Jalen
Right.
Warren where he had earned that opportunity. He's looking at these guys with a completely blank slate, and that gives a guy like Caleb Johnson an opportunity to make a new appearance. So that's kind of what I'm looking for here is like these teams that have new coaching staffs, how much can things actually get shaken up here? So again, back to the Giants, they've got new head coach, new offensive coordinator as well. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but those are the teams that I'm paying extra close attention to because, like, for whatever reason, the previous coaching staff really liked Darius Slayton. I don't think Darius Slayton's a great football player. I think he's pretty one-dimensional. The fantasy production's never really been there. So if I start hearing that this coaching staff really likes Malachi Fields or they really like Darnell Mooney, that is enough for me to say, okay, I don't have to worry about this Darius Slayton stuff that's been bothering us for the last few years. He's now out of the picture, and there's a new guy stepping up into that spot. So I think it's really important when you have these teams with new coaching staffs to kind of pay attention to who is climbing up the depth chart because the reality is like a year 4 or a year 5 player with the Rams probably isn't going to make that leap this year because Sean McVay has seen that guy for 4 or 5 years now. It's the new coaches, the new offensive coordinators. Those are when players really have an opportunity to make a difference.
Yeah. Any other new coaching staffs that you're really fascinated by this year?
I think the Eagles definitely got to pay attention there. The loss of Kevin Patullo. I think I've heard every fantasy podcaster in the world talk about addition by subtraction by getting rid of Kevin Patullo. And of course, I'm excited about what Sean Mannion can do there. But it's not just a new offensive coordinator. It's also a lot of new weapons with A.J. Brown out of the picture, with Mekhi Lemon and Eli Stowers coming in there. We've got Will Shipley now healthy as well. So I think there's kind of this idea of what the Eagles offense has been because it's been the same offense for the last few years. But lots of moving parts with new players in there, a new play caller in there as well. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how this running back room shakes out. We know Saquon Barkley is going to be a top it, but like, can Will Shipley win the affinity of Sean Mannion over Tank Bigsby? Can Eli Stowers be the guy who starts the season playing out of the slot over Mekhi Lemon? Like, these are all things that we'll find out through training camp, but I think that's definitely one of the more fascinating ones.
Stowers to me is an interesting case because he was my tight end one coming out of school this year in the rookie class, and he's still sitting there in large part because Kenyon Sadiq landed in a train wreck there in New Jersey. But some of the early reports about Stowers is he was struggling to pick up blocking schemes, he's struggling to pick up the playbook, he's playing behind other people. Uh, where do you think of that in terms of like the development of somebody like a Stowers who is coming in as an heir apparent potentially to a player who the team was willing to part with in this season in Dallas Goedert? Does it concern you at all when you see those kinds of rookies struggling to pick up the playbook kinds of storylines?
A little bit. And Stowers specifically, he's kind of one of those tweeners that worries me a little bit because he's not good enough to be an NFL tight end, but he's also like not nimble enough to be an NFL wide receiver. So he does need to kind of find a coaching staff that's going to play to his skill set. I think there is kind of this idea that he's going to step in and do the Dallas Goedert stuff, but I see he and Dallas Goedert as very different players. Like Dallas Goedert is that inline traditional tight end. He's a fantastic blocker. He's good through traffic. I think what we're going to see Eli Stowers do is actually a lot of the stuff that A.J. Brown is vacating. Now, I don't think that he's got the top end speed or the ball tracking abilities that A.J. Brown had downfield, but those short little slants and screens where you can create after the catch across the middle of the field, I think that's what Stowers does really well. So I think kind of just like looking at the depth chart and saying, well, they've got an old aging tight end here and they drafted a tight end. So many teams nowadays are running these multi-tight end sets that you need to have two complementary tight ends. So to look at like, the Ravens, for example, I'd see Goddard as more of that Mark Andrews guy, the guy who plays in line, the guy who blocks, the guy who's in on running downs. And then you see Stowers as more of that Isaiah Likely, the guy who can play out of the slot, the guy who might be detached from the offensive line but can run those downfield routes. So I think that Stowers specifically, like, I don't know if he's ever going to be that every down traditional tight end, but I think that his skill set makes him alluring in fantasy because he's such a good pass catcher.
And this to me also goes back to this new offensive coordinator who's in town in Sean Mannion, who has said that he wants to really open up that middle of the field and attack that. And of course, it's something that Kevin Patullo routinely did not do. He liked to throw it Well, he just basically liked his receivers to run straight lines down the field and hope the ball gets there. So, that is kind of this almost perfect storm of Jeff about to bite for something that may not work out very well because he's got his top-ranked guy in an offense that appears to be set in a way that might work for him, and now he's struggling to pick it up. But also, I think, too, tight ends, that's a tough position to play, whether you play it traditionally or not. I'm actually kind of not surprised. It may take somebody a little time to pick up a playbook. It used to take people 3 years to learn play that position in the NFL.
And that's we see, like the production age curve for tight ends peaks at 28 and 29 years old. Like it is very uncommon, of course. And that's why we are so in on Kyle Pitts after his rookie season and Brock Bowers after his rookie season, because for a tight end to come into the league and just immediately contribute at that level is nearly unheard of. Like it is very, very common for NFL tight ends to take 3, 4, 5, sometimes even 6, 7 years to get fully up to speed. So that's why when we do see these unicorns that just come in and immediately produce, that's why everybody says, okay, now this is a first round of a startup type of talent, because these guys only come around once every decade or so.
Yep. Yeah, talking about tight ends for a second, you mentioned Sean McVay earlier. I think we're remiss if we don't talk about the Rams tight end room, even if it's not a story either one of us might.
That was the next one I was going to bring up. So
this early on, but we'll dissolve that. And I will let you introduce it then. So we've got 5 tight ends at least in LA that can play.
Yeah, and I've got I was just reading, this was from Sarah Barshop on ESPN the other day, and she said several people in the Rams building have pointed to Terrence Ferguson as a player that they think will take a big step forward in year 2. Now, we saw a little bit from Terrence Ferguson down the stretch last year, but I am of the belief that he is far and away the best tight end there. And again, we talk about like the learning curve from college to the pros. That's why we saw Tyler Higbee early in the season. That's why we saw Colby Parkinson later in the year. But there are a lot of expectations for Terrence Ferguson. And this guy was my tight end 3 coming out of that 2025 class. I only had Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland ahead of him. He was led the NCAA in yards after the catch per reception at Oregon, averaging over 9 yards after the catch per reception. That's not yards per reception, yards after the catch per reception. Right. Like this dude is a freak with the ball in his hand, but he can also high point in the end zone, come down with contested catches. He is a very well-rounded receiver. So drafted young, didn't really get fully up to speed last year. And I think when you're a team with Super Bowl aspirations and you've got Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua, it's kind of hard to fit in a rookie development there. But I think Terrence Ferguson, he's one that I'm very excited about. But I think that with how deep this tight end room is, and with Devontae Adams on the last year of his deal getting up there, 33 years old now, I think that there is going to be opportunity for one of these young guys to come along. So I'm going to be paying close attention to all of these Rams beat reports and seeing if this Terrence Ferguson stuff is just kind of hopeful wish casting in July, or whether it actually translates to what they're doing on the practice field in August.
Yeah, and then they drafted Max Clare as well, who, there is at least one vision of the world where a year or 2 from now, it is Ferguson and Clare as the 2 receiving tight ends for Sean McVay. And we talked about him earlier in a different context about Ty Simpson. This is a man who is planning ahead for his football team, even in a Super Bowl contending window. He's brought in a potential future quarterback, or potential quarterback of the future. He's got his tight ends of the future, even if he's not using them quite the same way. So, as a dynasty manager and you're looking at this Rams tight end room, it's really just throw up your hands and say, now someone else can deal with this. But, I imagine you would probably put Ferguson, and I don't know if you put Clare up there or not. In my rankings, they are the top 2 in dynasty in the LA's room. I've got Ferguson at 15 and Clare at 30. Parkinson's 36, Higbee 49, and Davis Allen is 79. So he's probably off the radar. But I would
say if you're going as deep as Davis Allen, your rankings go a lot deeper than mine. But I'm pretty close to you there. I've got Terrence Ferguson at RB 15, just where you've got him. A little bit higher on Max Clare. Or I'm sorry, RB tight end 15. Yeah. I've got Max Clare at tight end 25, and then Parkinson just outside of my top 50. Higbee, I guess I've got Davis Allen at 73, so I go pretty deep with mine as well. But yeah,
Siggy, I think you go to about 82, Dave. I've seen your rankings, so incidentally, those of you who know that we're on Football Guys, you can see our rankings individually and collectively on there. So if you want to poke fun at any of the way we've got things ranked, you can see exactly how Dave and I have them. This is not the kind of show where we sit here and debate out rankings. That's not what we do here. But it is nice that when you and I are aligned. Actually, I think it was when I was first really getting into doing rankings for Football Guys, I had my computer run an analysis, and it said I was closest to you than I was to anybody else.
Look at
so
that. Love
apparently
that.
we see the world very similarly. So we're either both nuts or we're both geniuses.
Yeah.
So
I,
probably
I,
both
I no
nuts.
longer upload my rankings to Fantasy Pros, but it was always funny when I would draft a team on Fantasy Pros, and then it would say, Dave Kluge really likes your team. And I'm like,
Yeah.
you don't say.
Yeah. What are some of the other storylines that you've got your eye on here?
I just had one pulled up. Oh, I think Chicago Bears. I
Bears. We got to
told
talk about them.
Yeah, and I got a quote from Ben Johnson here saying, you get what you emphasize. Completion percentage is something that we are going to emphasize. And I wrote an article about this recently where Caleb Williams on deep balls last year was not just one of the most accurate, but also one of the most aggressive deep ball throwers. He was willing to push the ball downfield. He was very efficient on those opportunities, but it was the short and intermediate areas that he really struggled with.
Yeah.
And I think if you polled anybody before the season started, you'd say this is where Caleb Williams is going to excel in a Ben Johnson offense, and that's really where he struggled. So we saw him, one of the highest times to throw in the NFL. He is so good at extending plays with his legs. He's so good at finding those open receivers deep downfield. But I want to see if he can get those layups because we know this is a proven system. Jared Goff didn't need to buy extra time. He didn't need to run around like a chicken with his head cut off. He didn't need to rip the ball 65 yards downfield. He was just hitting those open receivers in the short and intermediate areas. So I feel like we kind of saw Caleb Williams doing the hard stuff last year, and that's really what I'm going to be paying attention to. And that's something that all of the Chicago beat writers know. They are going to be tracking Caleb Williams' completion percentage throughout camp. And I think that's the difference where last year we saw Caleb Williams kind of giving us middling QB1 production. He's got enough rushing upside, and he's got the weapons around him. If he can start hitting those easy throws, that's when we could see him ascend and be a top 3 fantasy player.
Yeah, Dave, I think you said something that a lot of people are kind of missing on this completion percentage because they may be just looking at it in aggregate and thinking the whole thing needs to come up. The dude's great deep. It's these shallower stuff that he's having some trouble with. I don't know if it's vision or touch or timing or a combination of all those things.
Have you heard his pushback? He said his pushback is that he led the league in throwaways. And he said, I don't like throwing interceptions, and those throwaways lead to hurting my completion percentage. So that's kind of the spin that the Chicago media is putting on it.
They do, but he throws away too many of them in the middle of the field, too. So
Right.
But so let's latch onto that for a second. So if we're hearing from the beat writers and we're hearing from the coach that we want to improve intermediate and shorter completion percentage because there really isn't room to improve his deep ball accuracy, he's already near the top there. Who does that benefit? I mean, does that change any of the calculus on, say, Luther Burden versus Rome Odunze or Colston Loveland? Tyler Warren's the other dude. Colston Loveland. I mean, or the running backs. I mean, what does an emphasis on shorter passing completion percentage do in terms of that Bears offense from a fantasy standpoint?
So I think Odunze is more of that downfield receiver, and we have seen in this Ben Johnson offense, it's very easy. And we probably shouldn't because it's easy, but it's also lazy to just say like, well, there was this player in Detroit doing this role and this player in Chicago is going to fit right into this piece. It's not exactly like that. But if you look, the X receiver has never really been a big part of the Chicago Bears or the Ben Johnson offense, I should say. And maybe you can say that's because it was a late career Allen Robinson and Josh Reynolds and Tim Patrick and, DJ Chark. Like they never really had a good X receiver. But it does feel like the role of that X receiver has always been to just stretch defenses vertically so they can hit the underneath shots. And those underneath shots, of course, would go to a Luther Burden, who's going to line up in the slot and get those immediate wins right off the line of scrimmage. Colston Loveland, who's going to be hitting those short crossers just like Sam Laporta did. So if they are trying to emphasize hitting more of the short to intermediate throws, I'd imagine that would benefit Luther Burden and Colston Loveland. But, again, it's just so hard. And lazy, maybe lazy is not the best term, but I can't think of a better term. But it's just hard for me to say that, like, because all of these washed up X receivers couldn't do anything in a Ben Johnson offense, that means Rome Odunze is not going to do anything in a Ben Johnson offense. I mean, there are levels to the talent here that we're talking, and Rome Odunze is much better than all of those guys. But there is one other quote from Ben Johnson where he says, I don't want my quarterback throwing 50-50 balls. I trust my offense to get players open, and I would rather throw to an open receiver than asking a receiver to make a play on a ball. Rome Odunze is not an elite separator. Like, he can flash open for a quick second. He can come down with contested balls. balls, but Ben Johnson wants to throw to open receivers. And when I go back and I watch what the Bears were doing last year, Luther Burden, Colson Loveland, those were the guys that were just open on an island where Roma Dunze was kind of fighting for balls as they were coming to him.
Yeah, I struggle with this wide receiver room in terms of rankings, and now this is exactly where I have them right now. I have Burden at 18 and Adunze at 19, so it tells you that I haven't made up my mind yet as to how I want to value these guys until I start seeing a little bit more on practice and seeing more what the game plan might look like here. But I think the very idea, this concept of shorter, more intermediate stuff and more accuracy, I did get Burden up higher than I've had him before. Because I think that is kind of the role evolution as he gets into a second year. And I wouldn't call Adunze a sacrificial X. Otherwise, I wouldn't have him as a wide receiver, too, in fantasy either.
Right. And then I think, the other one, if we want to talk about another team, another storyline I'm paying attention to, very similarly, that we're trying to figure out what the pecking order is going to look like in Chicago. Jacksonville.
Yeah.
Just copy and paste everything I just said. There are a lot of talented receivers here, and we all have our idea of how we expect the offense to work out. But I think this is one that I'm going to be paying a ton of attention to, because it seems like everybody has already decided, are you team BTJ, or are you team Parker Washington, or are you team Jacoby Myers? And I am kind of throwing my hands up and saying, I don't really know, but I'm going to be paying close attention to what's coming out of Jacksonville and hope that I can get a little bit of clarity before week 1.
We do think alike. I was just about to use the exact same words: Team Brian Thomas, Team Jacoby Myers, Team Parker Washington. It seems like the analysts and players and dynasty players, fantasy players have all kind of worked their way into one camp or another. I suppose I am in Team BTJ. I still have him fairly high at wide receiver 22, and I have Myers at 41 and Washington at 51. I'm not a big believer in Parker Washington as others are, but yeah, I think that how that all shakes out, it's going to be kind of fascinating. Is Brian Thomas going to be able to be more like that rookie season, or was that not the abomination? Was that the
it was an abomination.
Exception?
It was just a completely broken offense.
Last year was an abomination. But which of those? But I also think when we flip over a little bit, and one of the storylines I'm interested in is the running back room in Jacksonville, because you got Bashal Tootin. You lost ETN. He's now a Saints. You got Bashal Tootin. I think the initial thought line was, well, he's now the guy because he's there. But then Chris Rodriguez comes along, and a lot of people are missing an undercurrent to that, in that the coaching staff has a prior relationship with this guy. Is that something that sort of hidden kind of connection, exactly the sort of thing that dynasty managers are ignoring and probably shouldn't?
Yeah, I mean, I am an unabashed Chris Rodriguez Jr. lover, and I wrote an article about him the day that he signed with Jacksonville, immediately just saying, people are going to sleep on this, and they shouldn't. First of all, there aren't a lot of running back efficiency metrics that I care about, because so many running back efficiency metrics are actually just team stats that are just kind of convoluted in a way, rushing EPA. Oh my gosh, you look at that, Kyron Williams led the league in rushing EPA last year, and 2 years ago he was outside of the top 150. Rashad White, when he was the RB4 in PPR leagues 3 years ago, he was 149th in EPA, and he was 9th last year. That is just such a up and down, impossible to. It's a very hard stat to get any sort of read on. But there are 3 metrics that I care about, and that's yards after contact per attempt. Can you get hit by a defender and still generate yards? Success rate, how often are you doing the thing that you're asked to do? And then broken tackle rate. Are you breaking tackles when defenders try to hit you? Chris Rodriguez was top 5 in all of those last year. The only player with more yards after contact per attempt was Devon Achane. Chris Rodriguez had a flawless analytical profile last year. And then you talk about it, he is now getting teamed up with Liam Cohen, his coach from Kentucky. So, Liam Cohen, he was a part of that Kentucky staff when they had Will Levis and Wan'Dale Robinson. Chris Rodriguez was the engine that powered that offense, and when Liam Cohen had to come back 2 years later to coach that team without Chris Rodriguez, he talked about how hard it was going to be not having a running back that he knew he could give the ball to and pick up 4 yards. Now, I've seen people use this as a knock against Chris Rodriguez. It's you ask Chris Rodriguez to get 1 yard, he's going to get you 3. You ask him to get you 5 yards, he's going to get you 3. But there is a role for that type of player in the NFL.
Yeah, and Rashad White's had it for years.
Exactly. And you know what? You ask Bashal Tootin to get you 3 yards, he might get you -3. Like Chris
Yep.
Rodriguez doesn't do that. He keeps an offense on schedule. He wears defenses down over the course of a game. And that's one of those things that fantasy managers, when they get lost in the spreadsheets, hate that type of player, but coaches love that type of player. So yeah, I think Bashal Tutin, he had a great combine. I don't want to take that away from him. He ran really fast in spandex in Indianapolis a year and a half ago.
Yep.
But Chris Rodriguez, he was the preferred running back when healthy in Washington last year. Now the coach that coached him in college made him a priority signing in free agency, gave him pretty much the same contract that Kenny Gainwell and Rico Dowdle got, players that fantasy community is getting really excited about. So yeah, I'm with you. I love Chris Rodriguez in this offense. Of course, he's got that foot injury right now that's kind of mysterious. Some people are saying it might be a Jones fracture. Nobody really knows for sure, but I'll be paying close attention to how this is getting split up. And I think the best thing to look for when we get into training camp is who they're practicing with. Like, if we get Chris Rodriguez healthy to start training camp, we're 2 weeks into training camp. Bashal Tutin's been with the ones every single day. Chris Rodriguez is with the twos every single day. It would be foolish for me to keep holding it down for Chris Rodriguez. But if we find out that they're splitting snaps or that Chris Rodriguez is getting more reps with the ones than Bashal Tutin is, you better believe that I will be over my skis with Chris Rodriguez love at that point.
Yeah, I'll be with you. We'll crash right into the trees together, man. But the murky part though is, well, if he's not ready for the start of training camp, then we don't have that counterpoint of information, and Tuden is running with the ones. What does that do to us in terms of are we just waiting for confirmation or not confirmation? We got to get Rodriguez on the field before we make this decision, or do we watch Tuden pull away and say, okay, well, he's going to be the guy?
Well, I think he's going to pull away if his only competition is LaQuinn Allen, because LaQuinn Allen is a passing down specialist. So I hope all indications seem to be like we were getting reports in early June that Chris Rodriguez would be a full go for the start of training camp, and Liam Cohen just corroborated that a couple of weeks ago. So that's my expectation. But of course, we talked about it. Like, we get surprised by injuries every single year. Training camp opens, and training camp opens and we find out that Roma Dunze isn't practicing because that lingering foot injury from last year. Like, that shouldn't be surprising because these types of surprises happen every single year. So I expect Chris Rodriguez to be out there, but yeah, if he's not ready for the start of training camp, every day that he misses, this is a new offense. This is a new environment. This is a new offensive line that he needs to learn the nuance and tendencies of. Every day that he misses training camp will just slowly just knock him down a little bit in my rankings, because that's just more ground that he has to make up.
Yeah, exactly. What else? What other stories you were looking at for training camp?
Let me take a look here. I've got a whole list of ones that are really interesting me right now. Here's one that really piques my interest. Colts running back coach DeAndre Smith had this to say about Jonathan Taylor. We definitely need to find ways to take some of that workload off him. If I can find another guy or two that can take some of those carries off, Jonathan Taylor, is just going to be that much better. Now, this is one that we hear this a lot, and a lot of times this is just a fluff story that I'll throw away. You've got a superstar running back, and you want to take touches off him. It's really easy to say that in July. It's a lot harder when you're calling plays to take your best player off the field. That being said, Seth McGowan is a darn good running back, and he fell in the draft. This is another one of those, Jeff. We talk about these day 3 running backs, character concerns. Like, this guy, I think he had a 6-year collegiate career. Like, he bounced around. He got suspended for a year. He had some legal issues where he was let go by the team that he was with. I mean, it was a very arduous path through college, and because of that, it caused him to fall to day 3 in the NFL draft. But if you're looking just from a talent perspective, you can make an argument that he's a top 5 running back in this class. He is a hard-nosed runner. He breaks tackles. He is violent. He accelerates into contact. He can break runs for long gains. Like, he kind of does everything that you want to see from a running back, but because of the legal concerns, because of the advanced age, he fell quite a bit in drafts. In the NFL draft and in dynasty drafts. But he's going to be one of those names because I don't trust DJ Giddens all that much, and I don't think the team does either. He got almost no work last year. But if we're getting into training camp and they're saying Seth McGowan looks really good, Seth McGowan's getting some reps with the one, Seth McGowan can, take some of the pressure off Jonathan Taylor. We saw Jonathan Taylor over the second half of the season was not the player he was in the first half of the season. Now, we can point to the Daniel Jones injury and say that that's why the whole offense cooled down. We could also say that that workload started to take its toll on Jonathan Taylor. Either way, Jonathan Taylor was a tale of two seasons last year.
Yeah.
We've got the coaching staff saying that they want to alleviate this workload a little bit, and I do think Seth McGowan is a guy who's talented enough to carve out 20, 30, maybe 35% of the touches, and that would be a huge ding to Jonathan Taylor's projections if he's able to do that. Can I give you one more big storyline?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as many as you want. As many as you want.
Patrick Mahomes. He said his goal is to be ready week 1. And we already saw him at OTAs, big, bulky knee brace, but he was out there dropping back, throwing passes. Yep. And we know he is a competitor. Like, he has been lauded for his conditioning and mobility training and all this sort of stuff. But I think even more than just Patrick Mahomes being out there for week 1 is just the domino effect that this would have on so many other dynasty pieces. Like, because if Patrick Mahomes isn't out there, I'm firing Justin Fields up as a spot starter. Like, why not? Like, you can get QB1 production from Justin Fields, whether it's for 1 week or 4 weeks or 8 weeks. If Patrick Mahomes is to miss any time, then we are very excited about Justin Fields as a spot starter. We're also very less excited about Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce and Xavier Worthy and Tyquan Thornton and all the other pieces that are part of this Chiefs offense. We're probably less excited about Kenneth Walker as well. So I think this is one that, like, not just for Patrick Mahomes, because if he's out there, then we have faith in Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce. We're throwing those darts on Worthy and Tyquan Thornton and whoever else. We're much more excited about Kenneth Walker, but I think that if he has to miss time, 1, we're looking at exciting short-term production from Justin Fields, but 2, we have to temper expectations for every other Chiefs player.
We've seen an unhealthy Patrick Mahomes try to make it work, and it hasn't been that great with the receivers. But this is also, for me, an RB2 battle that's worth watching, even though on the depth chart it looks pretty clear who that person's going to be. If Emmett Johnson can't hold off Amari DiMercato, who's really more of a gadget guy in my mind, or Brashard Smith or Jaden Ott, then we've got a real problem in terms of someone who I thought fairly highly of coming out of college until he tumbled on draft day, although all the running backs kind of did that. Do you have any kind of sense at all about who's the guy behind Kenneth Walker?
I think it's Emmett Johnson, just because he has a very well-rounded skill set. But again, day 3 running back trap. Like, it feels like every single year there's a day 3 running back on the Chiefs that we fall for, whether it's Carson Steele or Darwin Thompson or Brashard Smith. Like, every year there's somebody. I do think Emmett Johnson is better than those guys, but that's just it's such a tough one to get a read on. And my expectation would be, like, we have seen that when Andy Reid has a superstar running back, when he's got a Jamal Charles, a LaShawn McCoy, a Kareem Hunt, one of these guys, he will give them the full workload. And when he doesn't, he's willing to just kind of split it up among everybody. So my fear is that if Kenneth Walker were to miss any time, we'd probably see a bit of Amari DiMercato and a bit of Brashard Smith and a bit of Emmett Johnson, and they'd probably call up Kareem Hunt and sign him for the 19th contract, and he'd probably get an annoying amount of touches as well. So I don't know if there's a clear, like, one-to-one handcuff in this backfield. I think Kenneth Walker's probably going to be, well, not probably, Kenneth Walker will be the lead back. We'll probably have more than enough that you can start him as a high-end RB2 on a weekly basis. And if he misses time, who's going to catch the passes? Who's going to score the touchdowns? We've been doing this song and dance with the Chiefs backfield for the last 5 years, and it's not a fun one.
Yeah, we were doing it with their wide receiver core too. It's the same sort of questions that we've had there. I'm with you. To me, the story isn't. Does Johnson pull away in a sense? And even if he does, as you point out, it may not matter, because he could still be the RB2 on the depth chart and still split those touches with somebody else, whether he's in relief of Walker or an injury replacement. But that's an RB2 battle I'm looking at kind of backwards, which is, I think I've got a front runner. Does he hold on to the position or not? And I've probably got other positions, other battles of RB2 like that around the league. But since we brought up Kansas City, I thought we'd jump on that for a second. Anything else that you want to cover?
I think the Titans backfield, we talked briefly about Nick Singleton, but that's what I'm going to be paying close attention to. I've been drafting a lot of Nick Singleton in round 20 of best ball drafts, especially in these ones where, you're playing for the championships late in the season. Tajay Spears, expiring deal. Tony Pollard, expiring deal. We talked about how new coaches can kind of shake things up a little bit. I think that Nick Singleton, if he is healthy in training camp, then I'm probably going to, move him from the dynasty stash and the final round best ball pick to the redraft radar if he's able to practice, because I think he is just such a good talent. But I think more than anything, like, he's a player that you want to keep stashed just because late in the year, this team might be out of playoff contention, knowing that Spears and Pollard are going to be walking after the offseason, that they might just say, we see this often in the final few weeks, hey, let's see what Nick Singleton can do. Let's see what we have with this guy so we can kind of get an idea of what we need to do this offseason in free agency. So Nick Singleton, I'll be paying close attention to what he will be doing in training camp, because that'll move him from kind of the dynasty stash into maybe this is a guy that I want to start targeting in my redraft leagues.
Yeah, I mean, I see a path for Singleton to 200 touches next year, but that path requires him to do enough this year that they don't sign a running back one out of free agency to replace the guys. I doubt they would keep Pollard. They might keep Spears, but the threat of bringing somebody in is pretty high unless Singleton proves that, no, I'm actually going to be the guy going forward. And I love that you said maybe out of the playoffs by then. That's very sweet. They are going to be out of the playoffs by then. This is not a very good team.
And the AFC South isn't a very good division either. So I don't know. I am still a Cam Ward believer. I am a Brian Dable and a Robert Saleh believer as well. Every year we see that team that surprises us, and the Titans, they're a team to keep an eye on. I think they look pretty good down the stretch last year.
They are. If Jacksonville can't put this thing away early, if they can't get it together the way, if Trevor Lawrence can't ascend, the line can't hold, then Tennessee might be able to hang around long enough to make a difference in the end, but not seeing it. They might do enough just to screw up their ability to get a really good draft pick, though, and that's always a problem. In your dynasty leagues, that's really a problem. You don't want to be a 6-win team in dynasty.
Right.
You want to be a 3-win team in dynasty. Just touch real quickly on the situations in Seattle and in Arizona. I think, Seattle, we've got Jadarian Price, who's coming in. I think a lot of us we're expecting a clear path for him to be the guy. Now we hear Charbonnet is ahead of schedule, which may or may not be true. And then you've still got, Emmanuel Wilson and George Holani sitting around. What are you paying attention to most out of training camp for these guys? Is it whether Charbonnet comes back or not, or is it what these other guys are doing?
So I don't think Charbonnet is going to come back in training camp. All indications seem that he'll be a mid-season guy. One of the benefits of doing, you talked about it at the top of the show, the SiriusXM show, is that every single week we have different beat reporters come on, and we get to talk to different beat reporters. And we just had, oh my gosh, I should know this name off the top, Corbin Smith with the Seattle Seahawks. He joined us a couple of weeks ago and really changed how I'm looking at this backfield. Like, he said that there are not many expectations that Jadarian Price is going to be a 3-down back. He said the expectation early in the year is that George Holani should start. We got to remember George Holani last year, after Zach Charbonnet went down, was handling a third of the running back snaps throughout the playoffs. Biggest games of the year. Yep. Exactly. And they were still keeping Holani out there. So he's a guy that's won the trust of the coaching staff. And then he said that they are viewing Zach Charbonnet, they said an Adrian Peterson-like recovery, where he is so far ahead of schedule. Now, we got to remember, he didn't even have his surgery until February. So, we're still looking at a mid-season recovery. But they said that they expect him over the second half of the season to go back to being that lead back, where Jadarian Price is just going to be the guy that kind of mixes in for change of pace work. So this is one that I'm going to be keeping a pretty close eye on. But right now, I think the fantasy community is just over their skis with Jadarian Price, hoping that the first-round draft capital is enough that he can run away with this backfield, where it sounds like he is going to kind of be in like a smaller role than what Kenneth Walker had, splitting touches with George Holani to start the year and Zach Charbonnet over the second half.
Just real quick on Arizona, where you've got the highest paid running back in NFL history. He has as many NFL touches as you or I have, Dave. And then you've got this kind of mess behind him for what would be the RB2 or RB3 role on a team that isn't going to be very good and may not really need much of one of those roles unless Love gets hurt. Are you watching anything, first of all, out of Algier, Connor, Benson, and last year's brief waiver wire darling Bam Knight, or are you just saying, I don't care, we'll just see what happens?
No, I'm waiting to see who gets traded and where they land, because it would be foolish for them to go into the season with this many guys. I got to imagine there's a team out there that is similar to me, and still saying like what could be with Trey Benson. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But like, yeah, I gotta imagine if a team calls up and offers a 6th or 7th round pick for Trey Benson, the Cardinals are going to take it, because my guess is that they're going to have to trim down the roster and they're going to
Yep.
release Bam Knight, Trey
Yep.
Benson, James Conner. One of these guys is getting cut, so I think that there's got to be some sort of savvy team out there that's saying, hey, before we have to compete with these guys on the waiver wire, let's just throw out a round 7 pick for them. Maybe that's the Packers. Maybe it's the Steelers. I don't know exactly who is going to be interested, but I would expect almost assuredly that one of these running backs gets moved before week 1.
Matt Walbin and I, being Chris Brooks stands, hope it's not going to be Green Bay, but that would just dash our hopes for yet another season there. But whether it's Arizona's running back or another one where it's really cloudy, I mean, what should dynasty managers do? Should they be aggressive and try to pick a horse now, or do you wait till there's more of a resolution, or does it just kind of depend on the situation?
No, I think you actually like absolutely should have some conviction in your takes. And, like right now, there are guys that probably aren't like the lead guys, but like Trey Benson is a guy that is sitting out there on waivers right now in some dynasty leagues. And I will pick him up to wait to see how this shakes out, whether he gets traded or released or ends up in a different situation or what happens. Same thing when we were just talking about the Seattle backfield. I think you need to have conviction there. Like if you think that Jadarian Price is just an awesome running back, go out and acquire Jadarian Price and hope that it breaks that way. I'm more of the belief that Zach Charbonnet is really good and that he is way ahead of schedule. So he's the guy that I'm trying to go out and buy in Dynasty. And we can change these takes and rankings a little bit as we get through training camp, but I still think that you should have some conviction in your beliefs before training camp opens up.
You, of course, do dynasty rankings, as do I. Which guys do you suspect are going to move the most between now and week 1?
Ooh, I think there's 2 teams that I'm looking at specifically that are very mercurial, and I'm going to say because we talked about the Jets, or I'm sorry, we talked about the Jags, we talked about the Bears. Those guys, I think they're already having some value insulation because we've seen most of those guys play already. But when I look at the Jets and the Browns, 2 teams that spent heavily on rookies this year, I think we are going to see a lot of value shifting right now. Like right now, it seems like everybody just kind of puts Casey Concepcion and Denzel Boston right next to each other in rankings as kind of placeholders. But if we start hearing by week 2, week 3 that Casey Concepcion is just balling out and Denzel Boston struggling to get up to speed or vice versa, then we can start to widen that gap a little bit with those 2 players. Similarly, we look at, of course, Garrett Wilson is going to be the guy in New York, but how's Kenyon Sadiq going to come on? How is Omar Cooper going to come on? I think right now we're just kind of placing these guys in our rankings and not really sure what to do with them. But I think that, it's not going to take a lot of a positive drumbeat for a Kenyon Sadiq or an Omar Cooper or a Casey Concepcion or a Denzel Boston for us to really shoot those guys up the rankings.
Yeah, really shoot might be a stretch for me. I have, if we look at Cleveland for a second, I got Concepcion at wide receiver 42 and Boston at wide receiver 47. But I do have the wide receiver 1 there, Jerry Jeudy, at wide receiver 78. So there's definitely there's definitely some room for that to move. I do think there may be some movement there in that. And then the Jets, I had Andrew Cooper on a couple months ago, and I think he summed it up best. He said, this is arguably the worst class for skill position players in years, and the Jets and the Browns spend 2 first-round picks on it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Let me see. Cooper, wide receiver 52. I do have Sadiq down a bit at tight end 14. I'm not quite sure then what to do with Mason Taylor, who they drafted a year ago to play the tight end role for them. That's going to be something to be watchful for as well for me. But yeah, the Jets, I think that there's too many people that operate in the middle of the field there because Garrett Wilson's also great in the middle of the field. And so I think that's just a mess. But there is, if you are convicted, be convicted. If you think Omar Cooper is going to be the guy, and he may very well be, act on that. And if he is, great. If he's not, well, it's another thing in Dynasty where it didn't quite work out. But if you don't want to take chances, you're probably not going to win at Dynasty for very long or at all because you gotta have some conviction and you gotta trust it and you gotta go out and do it.
And another one I'd say that I'm guessing you probably have ranked pretty similarly would be Jacoby Lane and Elijah Surratt. two guys that were drafted back to back by the Ravens and play very, very similar roles. And that to me tells me that the Ravens said, we really need a possession receiver. Let's just draft two guys of the same archetype and let them fight it out in training camp. So right now I've got these guys very, very tight in my rankings, but that'll be one that I think as we get into training camp, we'll get a clear idea of who is pulling away with that job.
I have Jacoby Lane as wide receiver 80 and Elijah Surratt as wide receiver 81.
Look at that. Yeah, does not surprise me.
And part of that for me, for Baltimore, is there is kind of a fairly clear pecking order. You got Flowers, who I think is, and I wrote about him in Footballguys very recently. I think he is a star that hasn't quite been discovered yet. That we were talking earlier about Yak Monsters. He is one of those guys as well. I mean, he was the wide receiver 7 last year on an offense that barely threw the ball. Right. And if there's any kind of
and he barely scored touchdowns.
He barely scored touchdowns. So to me, the touchdown equity, he gets dinged on that too. That's just bonus points because he's already doing really, really well in the rest of it. And you've got Rashad Bateman, who's kind of the perennial, well, maybe. But I actually do have Lane and Surratt ranked, both of them ranked over Bateman and Devontae Walker. So I think I'm with you. I'm waiting to see kind of who does one of them emerge. I think that wide receiver 2 role is open to one or both of them. But
for what it's worth, I'm still betting on Bateman. And I know in Dynasty, he's got the age on him a little bit, but I think if we're looking for one guy this year who probably locks himself in as a full-time role, it's probably going to be Bateman. But again, that's what I'll be paying close attention to because, I think Jacoby Lane is a fantastic player. It just seems like it's always kind of between the ears with him is where he struggles. Yeah. But if they say that he's like, hungry and playing hard and earning his role, like the talent is there, and that's a player that I'll be watching.
Yeah, I was asked well before the NFL draft is what guy would I want to come out of a dynasty draft with in the lower rounds? And Lane's the guy I came up with. I mean, that's just somebody that if you're going to take a shot on somebody, take it upside, and this guy has it, and he's now landed in an offense where he has the opportunity. It may not be this year. I think you're right in terms of if this were talking redraft, it's Bateman all the way for me on that. Right. He is going to be the wide receiver 2 until further notice. But if I'm sitting on Devontae Walker as a dynasty manager, you're probably going to end up cutting him if you can't get anything for him because I think he is on his way out. I don't think he's going to survive Lane or Surratt, but at the moment he's ahead of him on the depth chart. Any other stories or anything you want to talk about here, or any other moves that you think dynasty managers ought to be making right now as training camps start and we have all of these question marks that are still out in a lot of these cities?
Yeah, I talked about it earlier, but buy the injured dip right now on players that we know are good. Like Malik Neighbors, he's checked the boxes. He's a superstar. Mm-hmm. If you can go out, like this is probably the only chance you'll ever get a buy window on Malik Neighbors. Quinshon Judkins, another one. Cam Scatterboot, depending on how you feel about him, I think you can get a good discount there. Bo Nix, I think right now, very depreciated in cost. Like this guy's been a QB 8 or better in both of his seasons. Now coming off the ankle injury, there's some concern there. I'm buying him. Tucker Kraft is another one, coming off the ACL, there's some concern. This guy was the overall tight end 1 before he went down last year and is still on the right side of the age curve. So buy those injured players. And then the other thing is just we want to pay attention to camp hype, but don't buy too much into it. I remember last year people were bragging about buying Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt for first-round rookie picks. That is where we just lose the plot. Like, you don't want to get that far. Like, we want to get excited about these players that are getting a steady drumbeat, but don't let your eval take a player that was getting drafted in round 4 of rookie drafts, and then just because he has 2 good weeks of camp, that doesn't make him worthy of a first-round pick. So you want to try to maintain some sort of process. You want to react without overreacting, and it's really tough to say that. I mean, there are just kind of some vibes that go into this, for lack of a better term. Like, you just have to have a feel and an understanding for these sorts of things. But my guess, like, I love Katrin Allen, right? If Katrin Allen is having a great camp and all we're hearing out of Washington is Katrin Allen looks good, there is nothing in the world that is going to make me trade a first-round pick for Katrin Allen.
Right.
So you got to have that top dollar eventually where you can chase a price and then you know when to stop chasing it. Like Jonathan Brooks is a perfect example, and this is in Dynasty, but Jonathan Brooks, when I was doing best ball drafts 3 months ago, I was screaming from the mountaintops that Jonathan Brooks in round 12 was the best pick you could have made in drafts. Well, now people are taking him in round 5. They're taking him in round 6. I love Jonathan Brooks. I am not drafting Jonathan Brooks at that price. So I think that's something like where you like these players and you expect them to be camp risers, kind of give yourself that top dollar. Like, yeah, I will keep trying to buy Katron Allen for thirds and fourths, but once he creeps up into second round pick territory, then I'm out. I think you should kind of have that line with every player, knowing how high you'll chase their cost.
Dave, this has been a blast. I mean, it's always a blast hanging with you, my brother. I mean, this is just anytime we can talk, whether we're recording or in 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions, is outstanding. But before you head off, tell everybody where to find you, and especially your new venture over on SiriusXM.
Yeah, footballguys.com. You can find everything I got there. Staying super busy this time of year. We start the training camp reports in just a couple of weeks, and those are going to come out every single week. I'll be editing and leading that project, so you can find all that. Additionally, in about 2 weeks, I start my positional rankings series, which is one of my best performing series of the offseason. Yep. I go through every single position. I do tiers that I put every single player into. I do full write-ups on every single player as well, and those will be coming out every Wednesday starting in about 2 weeks. And then, of course, the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show, youtube.com/@FootballGuysFantasy is absolutely taking off right now. We're having our best offseason ever. It's been really, really cool to see that. We've got a nonstop rotation of different Football Guys staffers coming on there between now and week 1. We're ramping up to 4 episodes a week this week. We're ramping up to 5 episodes a week starting next week with 2 live streams per week on top of that. So I'm doing 7 shows a week over on that YouTube channel, in addition to all the writing I'm doing. And then Wednesday nights on SiriusXM with Tom Kesenick, we are doing the high stakes advantage, talking about high stakes stuff, bringing in beat reporters, bringing in high stakes players, fantasy analysts, talking everything fantasy football. So that is every Wednesday from 10 to midnight Eastern.
Dave, thanks again so much. And thanks to everybody who is watching on YouTube, listening on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. Please do us a favor and like and subscribe. And maybe even more importantly right now, share us on social media. Tell your friends about us. You don't have to tell your league mates about us in case you want to keep that edge for yourself, but tell everybody else. Like, share, subscribe, all those kind of things. Great review would be helpful. Comments are great too. I respond to every one of them personally. And stay tuned, because next week we will have another outstanding episode of Dynasty Compass.